إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن محمدا صلى الله عليه وسلم عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So there's a concept called the network effect, and I think it's very important for Muslims to understand because it relates to many aspects of the way that power is established and value is created in our world today. The classic example used to explain this concept is a telephone, which is useless if there's only one of them. If one person in the world has a telephone, they can't call anybody, so the telephone is useless. But with each additional person that gets a telephone, it becomes more useful because there's more people you can call, and telephones become more valuable, and the network, the lines that connect the telephones also become more valuable. This is used a lot today for understanding the value of social networks and social media like Facebook, Twitter. The more people who are on it, the more interesting and useful it is to be on it. Same thing applies to chat apps like WhatsApp or Telegram. The more people download it, the more people you can chat with by using it. And this concept has been getting a lot of attention lately because of the introduction of new currencies like Bitcoin. Because with Bitcoin, it's a lot more clear that value is directly affected by the number of users and by the usefulness of the network. So the more people who accept Bitcoin and who use Bitcoin, the more value it has because the more people demand it. And the value is determined by supply and demand. So the more people are using it, the more people are accepting it, the more people are buying it, and the supply is fixed. And this is something that didn't exist so much in the past. For example, gold, the supply was limited, but if the price got high, you could go out on the mountains and search for gold. It would be worth putting more effort into finding it. And of course, with fiat currency, with paper money, you could just print more. So the increases in supply were always counterbalancing the increases in value or the increases in demand. So with Bitcoin, since the supply is fixed and the rate of issuance of new Bitcoin is fixed and steady, there's a very clear relationship between value and demand. So as the demand increases, the price of Bitcoin increases. So if you consider demand as a source of value, this is what determines the price of a good. This is what makes the price increase. If you think of it in that way, having demand for an asset is almost like a reserve of value. That is the source of the value. This illustrates how powerful the position of the US dollar is because so many people demand it that this demand acts as a vast reserve of value that those who have the power of issuing US dollars can tap into and draw on whenever they want. Now, these examples, telephones, social networks, currencies, they've gotten a lot of attention. People talked about this a lot. But there are other lesser known network effects which are very useful to think about because you can understand how networks, when you visualize things as networks, you can understand if a network overall, if a system overall is beneficial to your interests or not. Because in some cases, it may appear superficially that it's beneficial to you, but if you view it holistically, it's not beneficial to you, so the net benefit is not there. It's a net harm. So, for example, consider academia, academic degrees, like bachelor's, master's, doctorate. This is a system. And a bachelor's degree is especially useful because it's recognized in a lot of countries. Because it's accepted all over the place, people would rather have bachelor's degrees than some other kind of degree. And this was not always the case. For example, in Germany, they used to have a degree called diplôme, which was something in between a bachelor's and a master's. And this was fine in Germany. It was recognized, everyone understood what level it was. But if anyone wanted to work outside of Germany,
nobody really knew what it was. You had to explain it. Is it like a bachelor's? Is it like a master's? Or how does it compare to whatever thing? And it was kind of inconvenient. So eventually Germany just left this system and adopted the bachelor-master's system. Likewise, in the Muslim lands, there were ulama, and they had a system of ijazat, and this still exists. But to a large extent, even in Muslim lands, if you want to study Islamic studies, if you want to become an imam or someone who is recognized for Islamic knowledge, to a large extent, there's been a shift from ijazat licenses to the bachelor, master, doctor system. So just as with the currency system, where you can draw on the value of that currency being demanded, if an academic system is in demand, like the bachelor, master, PhD system, you can draw on that power of its acceptance. And how does that work in the case of academics? The accreditation boards, which they determine what is a recognized bachelor, what meets the international standards of what a degree is supposed to be. And those accreditation boards are usually national boards, but in the Muslim countries, the people who sit on those boards are usually educated in places because they had to understand how the bachelor, master, PhD system works. So they went to England, or they went to France, or America, or Australia, and they learned how this accreditation system works. So they're already implanted, they're infected, so to speak, with this certain types of thinking. And then in order to maintain the bachelor, master, PhD standards, they go in to institutions, educational institutions, and they look at the curriculum, what is being taught, and they say, okay, you need to remove some of this and add some of this so that we meet these standards. What this effectively means is that the entire system of bachelor, master's, PhD, that this entire system can be influenced by those who the system originates from. So those who are in the highest position in determining what makes a bachelor, what makes a master, and what makes a PhD, they can exert their values onto all of the educational institutions that are within this system. Some cases, like in the West, where you have an Islamic studies program in the West, they may be able to directly influence by saying, exclude this and add this. And in other cases, it may be indirect because you have somebody who is on an accreditation board in Saudi or some Muslim country who is going and studying in the West and being influenced indirectly by their ideas, and then going and exerting influence on the educational system in their country. So another example of a network effect is markets. And online markets, you have eBay, you have Amazon, you have classifieds, local classifieds, and these benefit very much from network effects because the more buyers and the more sellers you have on a market, the more people will want to go to that market because the prices will be lower, the competition will be higher, there will be more products on offer, there will be more buyers, there's more ways to make money. So these markets really benefit from network effects. And of course, if you have a market, you can tax everything that happens on it. eBay, Amazon, all of these platforms, they take fees for this. And they also collect data for this. And that data is valuable. Even languages benefit from network effects. Why has English become dominant worldwide? Why are Muslims in almost every Muslim country studying English in primary education? They have not completed memorizing the Quran. They have not mastered Arabic grammar, and yet they're studying English. Why? Because there's a huge benefit to knowing English because you can speak with people all over the world. You can do business with people all over the world. Books. There are more books published in English because it's so widely spoken. And the same thing applies with Arabic. If you want to learn religious knowledge, there are far more books in Arabic than there are in English. So Arabic benefits from that network effect. But these, they can overlap to some extent, but to a large extent, all of these systems, when you have rival systems, Islamic systems and Western systems, one will benefit from the other's loss. So as English is studied more, Arabic is studied less. Political systems, too, are networks. So Khilafah is a network. Local rulers benefit from giving bay'ah to a Khalifa and the Khalifa accepts the bay'ah, and then their rule is legitimized in the eyes of any believing Muslim. Anyone who recognizes this Khalifa as being valid is going to have more respect for rulers who gave bay'ah to that Khalifa and whose bay'ah was accepted. The bigger that the Khilafah becomes, and the more people and the more rulers who give bay'ah to the Khalifa, the more weight it has to be accepted by this Khalifa, because the Khalifa has more power. So the more powerful he is, the more power is conveyed to the ruler who gives bay'ah to him and whose bay'ah is accepted. The same goes for the present international system of kufr with the United Nations and citizenship and passports, because the more countries join this system, the more countries there are who recognize passports and citizenship, and the more places you can travel if you have a passport and citizenship. Likewise, the more land that becomes incorporated into Dar al-Islam, the more useful it is to be a Muslim, really. The more rights you have by virtue of being a Muslim, so you can travel to more lands. And each land that becomes part of Dar al-Islam is not going to recognize passports, most likely. They're not going to say, okay, if you're a mushrik, you're not going to have the same rights as a Muslim, even if you have the same citizenship. So as a result, the interests of Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Kufr are diametrically opposed. That means the more Dar al-Islam expands, the less useful and valuable the entire United Nations nationalism, citizenship, passport system becomes. So when Muslims are participating in all of these systems, in all of these networks, it's important to look at where's the core of this network and who is really controlling it. For example, in the United Nations, it's controlled by an assembly, and they allow Muslim leaders and Muslim countries to participate in this, but those countries and leaders are always a minority. So there's an overwhelming majority of Jews, Christians, and mushrikeen who are legislating, and they're making the laws, they're defining what the laws of the international system are going to be, and they give some token concessions to the Muslims, but overall, it's in the control of the kuffar. When Muslims are participating in these systems, in currency systems, in academic systems, in political systems, even in markets, we need to be aware that these actions are supporting the strength and the power and the influence of the kuffar. So even if we get some disadvantages from it, we are harming ourselves because we are strengthening our enemies who are attacking our religion and attacking our land and stealing our wealth. So when it comes to building Islamic institutions and building Islamic systems and networks, it's going to be inconvenient because the system is set up to disadvantage networks that are under the control of Muslims. So it requires patience and it requires willpower to support these networks. Probably the most high stakes network where this logic, where this understanding can apply is the family itself. The family as an institution, because the family is an economic network where value is stored and transferred. If you go outside of the family to get goods or services, the total amount of value stored within the family declines and is transferred to other networks. Some examples would be daycare for children, where people go and pay money to have their children watched by strangers while they work. Psychotherapy, which is psychotherapy would often happen within a family with people chatting with each other, discussing resolving problems, emotional support. And this is something that people will pay a lot of money for in so-called advanced countries. Prepared food, people go to restaurants, they buy dishes that are already prepared, even like chips, for example, crisps, they call in England these packaged fried potatoes, that's prepared food. Medical care, the nursing, caring for the sick, preparing herbal tea or any kind of herbal remedies. This is something that can be done inside of the home and traditionally was often done inside of the home and is now transferred to a big industry. Entertainment, even telling stories, laughing, telling jokes. This then is replaced by movies, by plays, by whatever, something that you pay money for to get entertainment. credit. Even you have credit agencies which they guarantee that so and so is trustworthy, and this was something that used to be done by extended families. So if you wanted to know, should I do business with so and so, you could find that out by talking to the people in your tribe. They say, no, don't do business with him, or do business with him, or do give him a loan, or don't give him a loan. So this is now transferred to credit bureaus and banks, and money is paid for it, and education, of course. So now people are paying, either they're paying taxes to a central government that is providing public education, or they're paying money to a school which is providing private education, but much more education is taking place outside of the family, and the family's role in education is still important, but it's diminishing. And really, the more it diminishes, the more you advantage yourself in the modern system. This is why we see that generally the countries that are understood to be the richest countries in the world are the ones that have the least social cohesion. So if you look at average household size and the closeness of families, the more the family is broken apart, the more this country or this nation or this society will be labeled as being rich according to the paradigm of modern economics, of the field of economics in general. So in this sense, economics itself is a form of deception and manipulation,
because it shifts focus from one type of value, which is unrecorded value, to another type of value, which is recorded value. So it emphasizes
value which exists in the formal economy, and it downplays the value that exists in the informal economy, which is the economy of the family, the economy of communities, the economy of gifts. So this type of thinking, when you ingrain this thinking in people, it causes them to behave in a way that feeds the systems that feed the discipline of economics. But that's kind of another topic, might be getting a little bit off course. But what we have here is one network, which is traditional kinship networks, and on the other hand, we have fiat currency and the modern state. And this is a Christian-Jewish combination, it's a team. And these Christian and Jewish sponsored systems are collaborating at the expense of the family, and really Islam is the defender of the family. That should be very clear to anybody. The Jewish side of things with fiat currency, that's fairly well known. We know that the banking system was largely influenced by Jews. But what's less well known is the role of Christians in developing the modern state as an institution. This originates from monks and priests who provided social services in medieval Europe. And these institutions of the church, which were initially religious, were eventually secularized into the social services of European states. And this is partly because the religious people, the religious classes in Europe, were not families because they were celibate. That was part of their religious doctrine, that the priesthood and monks did not marry. So they didn't have families, and they devoted themselves for the sake of Allah, or whatever they believed Allah was. They devoted themselves to helping orphans, helping the sick, helping the poor, providing education.
And even actually providing defense. So if you look at old monasteries, they have fortifications, walls for protecting against bandits or marauding armies, and they protected the orphans or the poor or whoever was staying in them, also the monks themselves. And they were also productive economically. They produced the food, they produced everything that they needed. And if you look at the modern condition and the modern conception of the state, these are all things that are provided by the state today. So, of course, with providing all of these services came a lot of respect and influence. And at some point, the aristocracy, the elite of Europe, started to see this as a threat, and they needed to co-opt it. They needed to bring these monasteries and bring the institutions of the church
into their network. So many of these things which were initially for the sake of Allah, or whatever they thought Allah was, became institutions which were used for increasing power and influence. So today, for example, with the medical system, you see the pharmaceutical system has become a very for-profit institution or system, whereas in the past, the roots of this system, if you find the people who developed Western medical science, in a lot of cases they were priests or monks who kept herbal gardens inside of the seminary or the religious school, which is like the European version of a madrasa, or inside of the monastery. And they studied these plants, they bred these plants for their medicinal properties, and they manufactured medicines out of them. And as these societies, Western societies, became more and more corrupted, they started to use this power and influence that they had gained initially with what was probably mostly good intention. They started to abuse this power to gain influence. And this, just the example of medicine, that actually became a major tool in the colonization of the rest of the world and taking over the rest of the world. Because the medical system and medical technology and knowledge also benefit very much from the network effect. So when Europeans first arrived in other societies, they generally tried to portray the holders of traditional medical knowledge as witches or as evil or something like this. And they actually tried to eliminate these practices and replace them with Western medical technology, which they could then export, and it could become an export product. And if you look at any traditional society, medical personnel or medical experts, doctors, hold a position of respect and leadership in the society. So there is political power that comes with that. So it was very important for Europeans when they entered new societies they wanted to take over. They had to divert the flows of political power away from existing structures and toward their power base. So they needed to incorporate the sources of political power into their own networks. So, and even today, this results in prestige, in honor, in respect, in power, and also money, because for one, people are buying medicines from Europe. Even in, for example, India, you can find rich people will buy the exact same medicine for, 3 times the price, 10 times the price. The exact same medicine which is manufactured in India, but they'll buy the version from Europe, which is maybe a branded one, just because of the prestige and the status that comes with it. And this leads to all this money flowing to Europe. And even if there is a local pharmaceutical industry, the techniques and the knowledge required for maintaining the equipment, and in many cases the equipment itself, is purchased from Europe. So the top experts, or even the professors in the universities, they studied in Europe. If anyone wants to get a good job or have a high position using this technology to manufacture medicines, they need to go to Europe or America or whatever, one of these centers of power, and they come back with this knowledge. And the same thing goes with industrial engineering. Even if you want to get the equipment for the lab or for the factory, this equipment needs to be purchased from the West. And even if it doesn't, it probably, if it's manufactured locally, the equipment that is used in the manufacturing facility where it's manufactured is probably going to come from the West. So there's all of this power and influence which is then concentrated towards these centers of power, and all of that flows along with knowledge. So the more widespread this knowledge becomes, the more accepted it becomes, and the more useful it becomes, because people are willing to pay for it. They expect this is what medicine looks like.
this is worth so and so much. They believe in it, and their belief in it actually contributes to its effectiveness. This is called the placebo effect. So there's a huge network effect at play here with the medical system. So there are many, many examples where this logic is at play. And this is one of the fundamental problems of the Ikhwan ideology, which is that they think, okay, we need to use this technology. This technology is great and it's powerful, and we need to use it to bring victory to Islam. But what we really see is that the countries that are bringing victory to Islam are the ones that are most disconnected from these networks. And this actually makes sense. And for one thing, it's spiritual purity, because you become filthy by mixing with filthy people. And you have to, in order to use this technology, you have to go and study with them, you have to live with them, you have to be in their proximity. And even if you get this knowledge locally in a Muslim country, it's going to mean going to a university and mixing with people who have been infected and who've become filthy by being in the proximity of these filthy people. So how many high-ranking university professors in Muslim countries did not study in the West? Just go ahead, look at a faculty list of any university in a Muslim country, and look at where the people studied. A large percentage of the faculty studied in England or America or places like these. So, and it's not just about the spiritual effects of being around these people who Allah's wrath is upon them. So this is something the Sahaba used to, radiallahu anhum, they used to try to do. They would try to avoid places where Allah's anger descended upon it. So, for example, the people of Thamud, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he came near to this place, he hurried to get away from it, because the anger of Allah is residual. It remains in this place. So he tried to hasten to get away from it. I believe there's also a hadith from Umar radiallahu anhu, who tried to avoid the churches, and I think that was his reason. He cited that he didn't want to enter a church because he didn't want to go into a place where Allah's anger is upon it. But even beyond this issue, which is a very, very important issue, actually participating in these things strengthens the systems overall. Because when you come back and you take status and you say, look at me, honor me, I have a PhD from England. You get honor from this, but you also honor England. So you make this system, it's a give and take. So you cannot take benefit from it without giving benefit to it. So it really requires some sacrifices, because this thing is all set up like this. It's set up so probably anyone who listens to this has probably experienced pressure from their family to go and do some un-Islamic things, like go to a mixed university, go seek some type of knowledge, because there's prestige that comes along with this, and because this is status-seeking behavior. What an individual does, which raises his status, also raises the status of the family. So the family will pressure individuals to seek status within this system. And status is awarded within the system of the kuffar, which is now a world system which encompasses the Muslim countries. Status is awarded according to how useful and how beneficial you are to this system, which overall is at war with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Really, how rejected you are in this system, that's actually the true measure of your status. So the people who are considered the complete rejects, terrorists, who are imprisoned, who are reviled, who are insulted, who this system does everything that it can
to try to push them away from their path and get them to seek the benefit of this system. Those are the people who deserve the most honor. Look at how the United Nations ranking of countries works. Now, if you look and see any measure of progress and see what does the United Nations think the most progressive or most advanced countries are, they're going to look at different measures like democratization, infant mortality, gross domestic product, income per capita, infectious disease rates, and they're going to look in every single one, the worst countries, Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Somalia, worst countries. They always try to humiliate them and make them appear as if they're the worst. And then they elevate these morally degenerated countries like Sweden or whatever, Ireland. So this is the example that you can see through all of the kuffar's discourse and actions, that they invert everything. They invert nature, they try to make men feminine, they try to make women masculine. They dress up the truth like it's falsehood, and they dress up falsehood like it's truth. Right, now I deconstructed the system of the kuffar. I tore it apart. It's in ruins, inshallah. And what is the alternative? So how do we actually do this? It's very difficult. It's very difficult to willingly reject this status and face the attacks and criticism of all of the people who are invested in this system. So when your family tells you you have to be a doctor, or why don't you become a doctor, why don't you go to medical school in England, this is because they're already busy and they're already heavily engaged in trying to climb this ladder. But you can't climb the ladder. It's not really climbing, because generally as your status increases, you also elevate the status of those who are above you in the hierarchy. What you're doing really is building a pyramid, like Fir'aun, right? You're building a pyramid, but the nature of this pyramid is such that it's built by bringing more people underneath it. And the way that people are brought underneath it is through this humiliation. And this points to the relevance of the story of Musa and Fir'aun, because the path of Allah means disengaging from this system, this Fir'aunic, satanic system. Because the longer you work in it, the more you are elevating this pyramid, and the more you are elevating the honor of Fir'aun, so to speak. The more you're elevating the honor of tyrants, of tawaghit. And this story also of Bani Israel, this is also a preparation for what you can expect when leaving the system. This requires tawakkul. It requires trusting in Allah, and it requires hardship. So when Allah says, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ, this is addressed to the believers. So in the preceding ayat, all of these ayat in Surah Baqarah are addressed to the believers. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. So if you think about it, who in England actually is tested with hunger? Really, I mean really tested with hunger. Not very many people, I don't think. Really, fear, I mean, yeah, a little bit, maybe. But if you look at the lands that have the lowest status in the ranking of the awliya of shaitan, these are continuous realities. Hunger is a continuous reality. Fear, you have air raids, bombing, drone strikes. You have conflict like this. The people are tested in these lands. This is from the promise of Allah to the believers. So it may be helpful to keep this in mind when taking these decisions, which involve a lot of pressure about, wait, where's your status? What is your status going to be? How much money? Where are you going to get the money from? And this is something like jihad. It's more difficult in the beginning. If you look at like the time of the Battle of Badr, this was a very difficult battle. The odds were not good. They were not in the favor of the Muslims. They were granted victory by the grace of Allah. And after victories like this started, then more people started coming. And this is why the status of the Sahaba, radiallahu anhum, who fought at Badr is not like the status of those who came later. It's more difficult, and there's more reward that comes with it. So as we begin to rebuild, inshallah, Islamic networks, it's going to be more difficult at the beginning. And the more people engage in this, the easier it will become. The healthier and stronger Islamic markets will become, the more recognized and respected Islamic educational credentials will become, the more resources there will be for manufacturing, for building workshops, the more destinations there will be for Muslim traders, and the more business opportunities there will be within the Muslim lands, and the more prestige will go to medical practices and materials which are not reliant on hostile power centers and are not supportive of those power centers. So the last thing that I want to mention here before ending is that there are remnants of these institutions and networks in the Muslim lands. They're lying dormant. And this is another reason why Hijrah makes sense even to totally corrupt or whatever countries with bad governments. Yes, they're bad, but that's not an excuse for you to live in the West, okay? These institutions are dormant, and they can be reawoken, and they can be built upon. Awqaf still exists as an institution. Ijazat from scholars, this still exists as an institution. And these things are in the memory of the people. They're in the memory of the society. They're in the blood of the people. So these institutions can be revived and built upon. And the same thing goes really for even Islamic commerce. If you go to any Muslim majority country that was where Sharia was still in place 200 years ago or 300 years ago, and you talk to the old timers, just the very, go find the old people, 80, 90-year-old people, and sit with them and just talk with them and ask about the way things were, and you can learn about, you can find these remnants. And these are the things, these are the materials that you can build with when it comes to building a new system. Again, I'm not going to lie, I don't necessarily live up to my own ideals on this. Just because you can't live up to your ideals doesn't mean that you should give up the idea of having ideals, because a little bit of distance towards good ideals is better than none. So yes, this is difficult. This whole project is difficult. The idea of basically getting insulted by your family and peer group because you're not pursuing the right course that they think you should be in terms of seeking status in a system which is antagonistic to Islam, it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to give up the easy money that comes with participating in that system. Very, very difficult. The whole structure of society goes against it. But you can at least have the intention, and you can at least hate this system and this evil network that we have been coerced and deceived and duped and manipulated into becoming part of and submitting to. We can at least hate it, and we can at least want to get out. And it's also helpful to remember when you're being attacked and you're being criticized for refusing to go down this path and to try to climb that ladder in the system, it's helpful to remember that the people attacking you, you're going to be pushed away from them. Even if they're your own family members, you're going to be repelled from them by insisting on remaining on this path. And that will actually create distance around you, and it will bring you more into contact with people who are not committed to serving the Pharaonic complex, but who are actually interested in building an Islamic system and who will accept you and actually honor and respect you for your conviction and your intention to live according to Allah's command. And we can at least make little moves to prepare to transition as much as possible towards an Islamic system. And there's little elements. This project, it really, really needs political authority. There actually needs to be military force and authority over the land to build this. But there are little elements that you can at least learn, you can internalize in preparation for the eventuality which is from the promise of Allah that victory will be granted by Allah to those who fight for the sake of Islam. Of course, if you are just blessed with massive iman and you can just go for it and be really radical and just, I don't know, just reject passports completely and reject any of the documentation, any legal documentation that the kuffar want you to sign. Just sign this paper and you'll get out of jail. Yeah, and you can just reject it and say, no, I don't recognize it, your whole system's invalid. If you have monster iman like that, tabarakallah, mashallah, that's great. Act on it. But if you don't, still have the intention and, remember the hadith that if you see an evil, you should change it with your hand. And if you're unable to do that, change it with your tongue. And if you're unable to do that, at least hate it in your heart, and this is the weakest form of faith. So if you made it to the end of this, jazakallah khair, may Allah bless you and bless us with beneficial knowledge and guide us to act upon it. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.